Dr. Dan Ekere is still with us. Also joining us is Femi Mokiko, Fellow Chartered Institute of Personal Management and former Executive HR Director of Seven Barclay Company. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the show this morning.
Thank you.
As much as it is expedient to constantly increase workers' salary, many are also talking about the ability of the employer to pay, as evident in the videos we just saw. It was Senator Shehu Sani who tweeted yesterday, "It's fair," I'm quoting him now, "and just for the federal government to agree to 30,000 naira as minimum wage. That means 1K per day. This country can afford more than that in reality." Now, reality is relative, because in reality, about 18 states can still not afford 18,000 naira. Which indices do we use here to measure the ability of government or their willingness, so to speak, to pay this amount? Let me start with you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think before we even go to the willingness or ability to pay, we need to understand a few things about minimum wage. If we take an average worker that lives in Maiduguri, an average worker that lives in Lagos, give him any job title, clerk, operator, manager, you then ask yourself, what are the components of what it takes home? For us who have worked in this industry for a couple of years, we talk about basic salary, we talk about housing, we talk about transport, and other allowances. What some of us have argued in the past is to say that if we must get around this problem that keeps recurring, then let's try and look at each of these components. A clerk in Lagos, what is the job content of that clerk? A clerk in Maiduguri, what is the job content? If we take this, they are basically the same. Let's then go ahead and evaluate this job and pay clerk what we call the basic pay standard rate, regardless of where you are in Nigeria. But when you get to other components, housing, for instance, transportation, for instance, the cost of transport in Port Harcourt, in Maiduguri, in Lagos, and in my village, they're not going to be the same. The cost of transportation, housing, is not going to be the same. On those parameters, you can then say, okay, let's do a kind of zonal arrangement, which takes away effectively this. Almost every time we go for negotiation on national minimum wage, we run into this kind of crisis.
So in other words, democratize the minimum
Precisely.
wage. Let each state or each region determine the minimum wage based on their capacity.
Capacity minus the basic component, which is standard to everybody.
But will that include taking it off the exclusive list where it is right
that
now?
means we have to amend to get long-term solution to this. Is to fundamentally review the structure itself.
We can't make that happen before the 6th
But it cannot
November.
happen before. It cannot happen before November. You see, the worst thing to have at this time is a strike.
Okay, let's even take it to Dan Ekere there now. I mean, you are a Nigerian, aren't we all? And we will all, at the end of the day, bear the brunt of the strike that is being threatened now. But the Labour is saying that government has just been taking them on a rigmarole, for so long now about this minimum wage, that it doesn't see any honesty on the part of government.
Yeah, from the way
in spite of the committee, the tripartite committee set up and all of that.
Even from the kind of break they had, period. Do I call it a period of interregnum or what? Now, all of those things, if you factor them in, shows clearly that there seems not to be willingness on the part of government. Now, but the question is, do we deserve it? Yes, we even deserve more than that, But like he had rightly said, there are certain areas that we can, play around, looking at it from relative perspectives. But at the same time, to the question of whether ability and inability and willingness, I believe strongly that every state, even as they are today, is capable of paying that amount. In fact, in some cases, some of the governors and former governors can pay the entire workforce.
Wasn't there a time when Anambra, for example, paid
so we have seen all of that, because the kind of the looting of state treasuries is a major challenge. Then secondly, you find governors who just want to bear that toga. I'm a governor without really knowing what to do. They don't know how to generate funds. Meanwhile, there are idle funds in the states. Taxation is one of them. Investment in different areas can as well generate funds. There are so many resources that are not being tapped. And all they look onto is the share from the federal allocation. But you see, on a short-term basis, I think we can actually go ahead with this implementation. But I think that a solution to this really would be that we must run. We can't just bear the name Federal Republic of Nigeria when indeed we are not federating. There must be a proper federal structure.
Fiscal federation.
Yes, where every state, all these issues, each state can take care of itself. Decide what to pay, generate whatever you need, pay your people, and at the same time, issue of local governments, create as many as you want, reduce as many as you want, pay your workforce, do everything. So you should be able to take care of your things.
This
I have not seen where you have the local government as part of a federating unit, then you have a state. Where are the local government? Where are the states? Yeah. So it should be at least this local, which is the state, and the national. That is the way it should be.
These ideas you're bringing to the table, as brilliant as they are for the long term. And there's also the ongoing, talk on restructuring and all of that. But earlier this week, Labour has submitted the minute document of that tripartite committee meeting to Mr. President, because there's been this going back and forth on was a negotiation or a figure reached at that particular meeting. But beyond all of this, there are people who are saying that Labour should go on strike for more sustainable, more sustainable reasons than payment of salaries. There's the issue of wasteful government spending, exorbitant allowances for politicians, provision of basic amenities, because when push comes to shove, it is the value of the money that matters, not the figure. How do you react to this?
Yeah, I want us to look at the two components of our economy, the public sector, the private sector. You see, in the private sector, you hardly hear all of these stories. Why? Because the private sector already has existing framework for negotiating with its employees on a regular basis. And you don't go negotiating as an HR person without a mandate from your principals. Once you get the mandate, then you have an authority to stand up. You go ahead and you carry out your negotiation. Of course, before you get the mandate, all the things that people are talking about today, what is the inflation rate, what did we do last year, what is the relative, whatever, you will have taken all of that into consideration. Once they give you that mandate, the other party also gets its own mandate from its principals. You come together, you negotiate. Unfortunately, in the public sector, it doesn't happen that way, which is why oftentimes, surprisingly, government will sign an agreement. Suddenly you hear, we are not party to this agreement. How did it happen? Who gave mandate? Who picked the negotiating team? Now, to do all of this, what do you need to do? First of all, you ask yourself, even the ILO has given us conventions and given us recommendations, in addition to our own statutory provisions here. ILO Convention 131, for instance, it tells you the criteria, the basis for which you will set minimum wage. Do
you want to enlighten us a bit on some of those very
briefly? The first, if you look at, I think it's Article 43 of that section, Convention 131, it says that you should look at the need of the worker and his family and other factors. If you say the need of the worker and the family, give him $1 million a month. Is it not meeting those needs?
The need, but not necessarily the wants now. There
the need,
two different things. The need. Those are fundamental.
Precisely. Which is why I'm saying that if we go regionally, needs in Lagos will be different from needs in other places.
Housing, transportation.
But the same convention also recognizes that need is only one side of it. It goes on to say, what about the capacity to pay or the person who will pay? And the need to also sustain employment, high level of employment. Because I think it's recognized that, of course, the moment you start increasing wages anyhow, what do employers do?
They
become creative. They start looking for ways.
Which is one of the reasons that experts, some concerns, some experts like yourself have actually put up there, saying if government raises minimum wage, the chances are that, unemployment will follow suit.
It should be expected. Because what I indirectly say is that, I was using call them citers, for instance. Can I get a technology that will cite without human beings?
The human factor,
Employers begin to look at this.
Is it possible, Dr. Dan, that we are just scratching the surface? I heard someone say yesterday, for instance, the exorbitant amount that parents pay in private schools. If, for instance, we have standard education, quality education in public school, and government makes it free, it's a lot of burden taken away from the average Nigerian worker. There's the increasing standard of living, increasing, cost of living. Are these also cost of living? Come on, it's going to get better,
you can.
But how can Labour also engage in these very important important indices, apart from, you know, crying out for an increase in salaries?
Thank you. The first one I want to start from is, you know, where the first question you asked earlier about whether there was any figure, concrete figure, agreed on. Yes, those, you know, government most times don't tell the truth. Yeah, but others who were part of that meeting actually said, you know, because when you hold a meeting, we are 4 here, assuming we hold a meeting and want to take a decision.
Yes.
And out of the 4 of us, 3 were the principle of democracy. If 3 of us agree on a particular thing, and you are saying no, obviously that becomes our position, even with your reservation. Yeah, there was such a position where they all agreed on 30,000, except the federal government, who was
happens to be an employer,
who was saying that there was doubt whether this figure is practicable. All right, but there was nothing like, okay, we will not take this. So you were only expressing whether it is possible, but at the same time, you didn't say, okay, this figure we've agreed on, we don't agree to it.
Let's before the issue of the figure. Okay, yeah.
Apart from that, on the issue of whether we should look at the wastages or not, labor is only a, you know, a union. What do you call it? A labor union? Okay, it's an association, and what is primary to them is the interest of their members.
Those other indices not their interest as well.
It goes beyond labor. It's a matter for the entire country.
Let me just add to. You see, when you go for negotiation, the ultimate goal is that we will sign an agreement.
Yes.
But it is not in all cases that we end up with an agree. You can agree to disagree.
That's right.
Okay? Yes, 4 of us were at the negotiating table. 3 people have said yes. 1 person says no. Means there's no an agreement. There is no agreement yet.
Especially when that one person is the most important factor in this agreement.
It's not only government administratively, it's also the largest employer of labor in this economy. So they are playing those 2 roles. If you then disagree, what do? There's a process for resolving the disagreement. Up until you get to NIC. The Trade Disputes Act is very clear about if you cannot agree, then go through this. If you don't get it resolved here, go through this. If you don't get it, we don't just go for a strike straight away. Because a strike does nobody any good.
That's right.
Both the workers, the employers, the economy as a whole.
In other words, the labor has not explored all of those options. But what was the federal government thinking when it increased the pump price of petrol from 65 naira to 145 naira and told labor we will increase the minimum wage so that we can cushion the effect or the impact of the increment in the pump price.
I was privileged.
And I guess it's on the basis of that the labor has been insisting that this minimum wage has to go up.
I was privileged to be a part of the last negotiating team.
Okay.
This 18,000 naira we are paying, I was privileged to be part of it. There's a provision in the act that followed of a mechanism that will regularly, without this kind of sitting together on a 5-year, 10-year basis, regularly there will be an adjustment.
Regularly would be what now?
Could be 2 years, could be 3 years.
In
the private sector, for instance, no. In the private sector, for instance, we have a procedural agreement that says every 2 years. In some sectors, every 3 years, you sit down together to negotiate. That provision is in that act. If we had implemented it, we won't be where we are today, which is also another sad comment on the way we run governance in this country. We take a decision, but to follow it up with implementation, we fall short. Yes.
Another thing we've heard the Minister of Labor talk about is the fact that employees cannot determine what the employer pays.
That is correct.
To an extent, that sounds true because nobody.
But does the employee have the right to negotiate and say this is the figure that I believe I am worth?
Yeah, but even in the case of labor now and federal government, the employees are the employers. You see, yeah, the employees.
How do you mean?
The employees are the employers. You see, the federal government does not belong to Buhari. It does not belong to any of the governors. It belongs to the people.
True.
All right? So it's quite different from a Dangote who went to the bank.
Buhari has been given the responsibility to lead. That's what makes it different.
Fine. So if we have given you responsibility to lead us and you are misleading us and we're saying, come this way, what is wrong with that? So that is what it amounts to with respect to government. But if you talk about the other private, establishments, there are 2 different things. So labor is equally looking at what they are putting into it. Because the whole resources with which we are talking about pay us is something we are generating.
You know, what Chris Ngige is saying here is that government's proposed new wage was based on critical facts, indices, incapable of causing disequilibrium in the economy or upturning the national social order.
Yes.
It sounds like
almost like talking over people's heads.
No.
Of course.
But what I'm really concerned about here is the fact that a negotiation took place.
Yes.
Prior to this time, it was 18,000 naira.
Yes.
Labour says 30,000 naira. And the federal government says we can't afford that. What we can afford is 24, and that's still an increment. I mean, why should we now create an impression that, oh, federal government does not want to increase the minimum?
It's not ceding any ground at all.
No, Labour is not saying federal government does not want to increase. What
they are not serious about it.
Yes. To start with, even the temperament with which the meetings went on was enough to show some signs of unwillingness on the part of the federal government. That is one. Then secondly, the figure for Labour is too marginal, considering the cost of living that you have equally created by virtue of your increment in the poor price and all the other things that you are doing. So why do you want to strangulate the people? When we know that even from the kind of, jumbo paces of sectors and the activities of government itself, in terms of,
maybe that is why a lot of people who have been criticizing Labour's stance on minimum wage have been saying there are other things you need to fight for. Yes. For example, the take-home of lawmakers. Nigeria's democracy seems to be the most expensive in the world.
That is correct.
Wouldn't it make sense if the organized labor could actually start their fight from there?
Yeah, that
that some of these funds could actually be freed up for,
you are correct. You see, Labour can as well join in that struggle, but I'm saying that is not entirely, Labour's domain. That is something that the civil society should actually rise up to. But unfortunately, even this government seems to have buried civil society because the kind of vociferous voices we're hearing in the past, I don't know if all of them have died. We are not hearing much of that.
Do you agree, sir, that this is not Labour's domain? Labour has the certificate of registration for the party, for the Labour Party. They are even involved in politics. So how can they not also be involved in this other indices?
It's like it's more of
I think for Labour, all my practice, I kept telling my people, let it not just be on bread and butter issues alone. There are issues that, yes, we all need bread and butter, but there are issues that are also more fundamental on a long-term basis. Both in the private sector and the public sector, there are issues.
Like what, especially in the public sector?
In the public sector, for instance, you just highlighted a couple of them. The whole structure of governance today, in terms of cost, needs to be challenged. And Labour can play a very prominent role in this.
Absolutely.
I think it's the present Emir of Kano. He gave us statistics about the percentage of our budget that goes into funding
the,
just the assembly, National Assembly. I think that's some strong reasons. If you also go to the private sector, there are labor practices that ordinarily you will expect Labour to be able to stand up and challenge. But it's only when you hear of salaries, wages, negotiation of this, you will see Labour. What happens to the other matters?
In fact, that's perhaps the only time we see all of them unite.
Aren't Nigerians even strike weary now? You wonder
you go to some countries
to what
in the private
extent
sector,
Nigerians
and the
will
practices you see, you will ask yourself, will this happen if those companies are operating in their own countries? I'll give you an example. Look at this Lagos-Ibadan Express Road. I ask myself every day, Julius Berger is from Germany. If they were giving this contract to work in Germany, would they treat the people that use this road the way they are treating them? I don't think so.
Because the people demand better.
Because the people will get up and say no.
I even doubt if the German government will operate their contracts the way we are doing. That is part of the problem too. You see,
I think what we are seeing in Labour today is just a little bit of the general
malaise.
Malaise
let me take you back, memory lane. It was surprising to actually read that in the First Republic, that the Western region actually was paying more than the federal government, though the federal government actually set the minimum wage. So is that a template that we can actually go back to? I mean, if it has been done before in Nigeria.
Of a federating system. That is exactly what we are saying.
It says minimum wage. Minimum wage does not mean you cannot pay more.
It's not a maximum wage.
That's right.
It's minimum wage.
That is it.
For instance, if you allow the states to operate the way they... I don't see Lagos State, for instance, paying the same wage with a state like
Jigawa,
name
for
it.
example.
I won't name any state. Name any state.
I mean,
they can't pay the same thing.
But help us understand very quickly what the implication of an increase would be on the real wage of the worker. For instance, if government pays 30,000 for someone who already earns above 18,000, does that mean automatically the amount of money he or she earns on a monthly basis doubles?
Okay, you see, that's one thing we also need to understand.
Yes.
Minimum wage does not imply general salary increase.
Really?
It says minimum wage.
That's the floor.
That is the floor.
below which you cannot.
Below which no employer should pay. And usually they put a figure.
Okay.
If you employ 10, 20, 50, the current one is 50. Minimum that you can pay is 18,000.
Okay.
Nobody stops you from paying 60, 70, 90.
I
Nobody
get that
stops you.
precisely, but my question is for someone who already earns above 30,000 naira.
What we would then be asking for would be how do you
adjust
the allowances?
Yes.
Are you saying that this increase in minimum wage is not going to change the figure such a person currently earns?
For quite a number of people, this minimum wage will not change your figure.
So what
But
exactly
for a
are we
good
talking
number of
about
people,
here?
Quite a number of people. That's why I'm saying it's not general salary.
Those who
increase.
are
So
earning below,
especially-
those who are earning below 18 will
Yes.
rise
They
to
will
30.
move
That
to
is the meaning.
30.
Yes.
That is
And
not
then
to
there
say that
will
you who
be-
is getting 100 will
We'll
not get
get
200.
an
No.
additional.
That's not the issue.
So the
That's-
bulk of those who enjoy this are those who
Yeah, the
already
people- the-
earn
but the bottom
less
line-
than
the people,
30,000.
the vulnerable
This is
people that
interesting.
Now we understand.
That is where
it.
I see, we need to really look at that very critically. Because today you are talking about population and all of that. If you don't factor all this into it, you find a set of people who will create the population for those who have the resources, and at the end of the day, it will be chaotic, you know, because sometimes when you create a scenario where somebody is unable to meet up with certain things, thereby creating some level of idleness will result in some of, activism at home.
It's interesting
you
you're
know?
even talking about idleness. And I recall in the emergence of this administration, El Rufai, the governor of Kaduna State, said whatever policies that government has in place will not go anywhere unless the civil service is reformed. And Labour doesn't seem to be talking in the direction of
In fact,
actually
that is one area we should
reforming
look at.
yes,
because when you look at it,
is
we are talking
not labor that is also the
we are
civil
talking
service.
about minimum wage. I think the emphasis
Can we begin to
should be,
look at that too?
the emphasis should be, okay, now you are talking about minimum, what about your service delivery? You know, a scenario
And
in which
productivity and-
you will be sitting on files, a file that you spend a few seconds on your desk, you tie it down, hoping that whoever will come before anything and all those. You see, if you are emphasizing the inadequacies on the part of labor, it will make a whole lot of sense. So that we should know that it goes with responsibility. You don't just talk about increase the pay without, corresponding, performance.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Mutika?
I do completely. In fact, at a point we said that we won't just be negotiating on salaries alone. Let us also negotiate on productivity.
That is it.
We give you a 10% increase in wages. What is the corresponding increase in what we will get in return? Of course, we know that productivity is a function of so many variables, not just whether we pay you high or not. But we must be able to isolate the impact of this increase and say,
the
yes,
quality of work
this
done.
is worth it. If it's not worth it, then we don't go for it.
What kind of reforms would you want to see for us to actually make progress, both on the part of government and the workers?
We have short-term and long-term reforms that are necessary. In the immediate future, so to say, we need to sit. You see, there is a body in the Federal Ministry of Labour that is called National Labour Advisory Council. That council has been moribund for God knows how long. And each time you raise it, what's the reason? They will tell you it's funding that is the challenge. If that body exists, it's a body of labor, of employers, and of government. These are the tripartite body that make up this body, units that make up this body. If they meet regularly, a lot of the challenges we have in our industrial environment, I mean industrial relations environment, a lot of those crises will not be there. The first thing to do is we need to reactivate that body, bring it back to life. Yeah, let the various representatives from all of these interest parties, let them come on board and regularly be addressing issues. A lot of these issues that we are talking about are things that that body should have been addressing before it gets to a crisis point. Long term, I still maintain very strongly, we need to reform that negotiation framework where one body will negotiate for a state that is struggling to solve. I'm sure you know that some of these states, if we are to If we are like a private sector with a balance sheet, liability side,
and asset,
a lot of this, some of these states, sorry to say, will be a liability on us. But they are already their states. They have governors, they have commissioners, they have DGs, they have all sorts. The wage bill for all of those ones alone runs down the whole thing. If I become a governor, for instance, the first thing is to prioritize. What will be my priority?
Yes.
Anybody who doesn't get salary, we don't go to any other place. You must pay salaries first, because that salary itself has multiplier effect.
That's right. Especially in an economy where we have a lot of dependent people.
A lot of people are dependent on
we
salaries.
don't know that government is overloaded.
What will then happen is that I may not have enough resources for capital projects. It then becomes, how do I assemble brilliant people around me, creative people that can help me generate money with which to carry out my capital projects.
And not just appointing on the basis of patriotism.
That's right.
It's about round pegs.
I want us to quickly touch on this. There are insinuations that the federal government initiated the no work, no pay clause during the tripartite committee negotiation. How relevant is this at this critical time?
Labour, on the other hand, is saying what government needs to do is actually look at no pay, no work, and actually criminalize the non-payment of salaries.
Of salaries.
Maybe we want to look at all of that.
Yes, indeed. It should be, really. The fact that somebody has worked for a particular thing, the person deserves his or her wages. You know, but where you are now owing workers, that one has not become an issue for government. That it is going on strike that you are now invoking no work, no pay. What about the no pay that you have done so far? Has it brought about no work?
Shouldn't the two parties equally carry this burden?
Yeah,
because it is a moral burden.
Both parties have a case. Section 43 of the Trade Dispute Act, subsection 1, is very clear. In fact, it calls it specific provisions for what to do with wages during period of strike and lockout. Strike is the tool the labor people use.
Yes.
Lockout is the tool the employers use. And that provision says that if there's a strike, within that period where there's a strike, you lose two things. First, your salary. No work, no pay. Secondly, continuity of service. For the period you are on strike, you don't reckon with that period as part of what you... I worked in a company for 30 years. 2 years I was on strike cumulatively. Remove that 2 years. It means you work for only 28 years. Exactly.
Yeah, there's no problem.
And then on the part of employers, if you lock out, you must also pay. Why? Because you are the one who said.
So why are we making an issue out of these if it's already
in the law?
In the law?
What about the aspects that Labour is talking about? Very
generally
quickly,
here we are not law abiding.
Criminalizing the non-payment of salaries. Who will be paying? Who will? I mean, for not paying.
Is that also part of the law?
Is the employer? Is the employer? As a matter of fact, we should be able to chase governors who are not able to pay salary. We should chase them from their office because it means that they are not worth that
Who is going to chase them?
Okay.
No, your PVC.
They are not worth the office.
Gentlemen.
Because you are there to galvanize resources and make life meaningful for them.
I think it is
Thank you so much for coming on the show this morning.
Femi Mokiko is a fellow Chartered Institute of Personnel Management of Nigeria, CIPM. He's also a player in the private sector. Thank you very much for joining us.
Dr. Dan Ekere is a lecturer with the University of Lagos. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.